Hey, hey, my podcast family. I am so thrilled to be here with you on yet another episode. So, today, my guest is Lindsey Vestal. She is an occupational therapist with a special interest in pelvic health. She is a true pioneer in the field of pelvic health and has dedicated her career to helping individuals through a biopsychosocial approach. She's also the founder of the Functional Pelvis, the first in home pelvic health practice in New York City run by an occupational therapist. If you're wondering what an occupational therapist is, don't worry. We're going to answer that in the podcast. I was actually a client of Lindsey's back in 2016 when she lived in New York City. So this is a great full circle moment. So during our conversation, Lindsey shares insights on the importance of taking a holistic approach to pelvic health and how she works with clients through a trauma-informed lens. We delve into the complexities of pelvic health and how sexual trauma, in particular, can make people very reluctant to seek out pelvic care with a gynecologist or a physical therapist. And Lindsey discusses how she approaches working with these clients with sensitivity and empathy. We also discuss how practitioners in this field need to be knowledgeable and empathetic, but the challenge here is that there is no standard training on how to provide trauma-informed care. Lindsey is on a mission to change that, though, and her work in educating other OTs to become rockstar pelvic floor therapists is a step in the right direction. Tune in to learn more about the critical need for trauma-informed care in pelvic health and how Lindsey is making a difference in this area. Hi, Lindsey. Welcome to the show.
Nicole, what a pleasure to join you on your podcast. Goodness, I think this is our second time together. So
It is.
I think my life is complete. I've been on Period Party twice. I'm great. I'm good.
I'm always so happy to have you on because you're a wealth of knowledge. And also, for everyone who's listening, we've just been talking for the last 30 minutes. Because this is what happens with my guests, because I want to talk to all of them, all the time, but that doesn't quite happen when I want it to, but that's okay. We have podcast interviews for that. So thank you again so much for being here. I'm really, really pumped for this conversation.
Oh, let's do it. This is one of my favorite topics, and I always love chatting about it with you.
Absolutely. I know there's a lot to share. And I think that, my goal with this episode is to answer a lot of the questions that I've gotten recently from women who have been struggling with their pelvic health. But before we do that, I actually would love to have you share about how you got into this, how you got to doing this kind of work, because I know that there's an experience that you had with your dad on his own health journey that led you to this.
So my dad and I are very close, and I think I gain a lot of my attributes from him. He's a very extroverted person. He's someone that's just really energized by life and seeking out opportunities and challenging himself. And it was about 20 years ago now where I watched my very gregarious, outspoken, extroverted dad become very socially withdrawn and basically not choosing to participate in any of the activities that brought him joy. And this corresponded with him getting the diagnoses of bladder and prostate cancer. And the symptoms he was experiencing that caused him to withdraw were urinary urgency, urinary frequency, which are a very common list of symptoms that people experience that come to seek a pelvic floor therapist. So I started doing research. At the time, I was a technical writer. I have an undergraduate degree in English. And I remember being like, aren't there just muscles down there? Dad had successfully gone through a knee rehabilitation years before. He rocked it. I was like, Dad, there's muscles down there. We can do something about this. So I found a pelvic floor therapist for him. This one was a physical therapist. And we got my dad back. I mean, he just, true to form, diligently did his exercises, paid attention to the education that was given to him, and the urinary urgency and frequency were gone. And I was so moved by this experience. I loved that this was a part of the body that we don't speak about a lot, and that someone actually took the pride in specializing in it, especially for someone who maybe, my dad was in his 60s at that point, definitely had a lot of pride and self-worth. And, she made this really easy on him. And in fact, I think they're still friends to this day, that built a really good relationship. So I was like, I want to do that. So I just went on my journey. I was also a choreographer at the time and thought I was going to pursue physical therapy school. So when this happened, it summed everything up for me. I was like, that's it. I'm transitioning. I'm going to go ahead and study pelvic floor therapy as a physical therapist. So started going down this path, and at the clinic I was doing my observation hours on in order to apply to graduate school, the physical therapist who I'd been following called in sick one day. And the director of the facility was like, hey, you can either choose to follow another PT, or it's also really cool to check out the cross disciplinary team. You can check out speech therapy, you can check out occupational therapy. Well, I was like, I think I can take a gander at what speech therapy is. Pretty self explanatory, but what the heck is occupational therapy? What is this all about? I'm going to go check that out. I'm a very curious person. And so I went. And on this particular day, the OT or occupational therapist was working with someone who had a stroke. And they spent a little bit of time together in their gym doing some exercises, but the bulk of their work together, Nicole, was in a private room doing work on memory. And I remember thinking, this is fascinating. This person had a stroke. They were struggling with some memory issues. And I was like, what is this profession that is melding physical and mental together? This, if I'm going to do pelvic floor therapy, I want to do both. This is a private part of the body. It's a part of the body that you need to feel secure and safe and comfortable with. And I want to do this I want to emphasize this mind body connection. So I found occupational therapy. I got into NYU, and the rest is history. And I am 100% specialized in pelvic floor therapy through my private practice in New York City. But now I pivoted and I'm supporting occupational therapists who want to pursue this incredibly rewarding field.
Yeah, this is so fascinating to me because I have a feeling that people who are listening don't even really know what occupational therapy is. And it was like what we were talking about before, the fact that you don't really know you need this until you need it. And you don't really even know what you need when you need it. That's the challenge. So can we talk a little bit about that? Like what exactly is an occupational therapist, and how is your approach to pelvic health different than say like a pelvic physical therapist because of your training in occupational therapy?
Yeah. So you're right. You drive by Main Street USA in any town, you're not seeing an occupational therapy marquee, right?
No.
You're seeing Phoenix physical therapy. You're seeing, reinvent yourself physical therapy. So I think, it's not in our common everyday vernacular. Number two, the name is a bit misleading. It sounds like we're getting back to work, occupational therapy, right?
I've always thought that.
Right?
Yes,
And
yes.
so I remember 2 years into my 2.5-year program at NYU, we were still talking about what is occupational therapy. And I was a slightly older student. And I remember thinking to myself, this is going to be a problem, isn't it? Like we're still defining it. We're still trying to figure it out. So yeah, true to form, I'm probably a double horned unicorn because no one really knows what OTs are. And not many people know about pelvic floor therapy either. So I spend a lot of time perfecting my elevator speech because it's a big mystery. So occupational therapy, came out around the same time as physical therapy. We really had our heyday in World War II. So that's when a lot of the soldiers were coming back with life-sustaining injuries, right? World War I, a lot of them just died. Now they're coming back in World War II with shrapnel and things like this. They're actually alive,
Right.
but they require rehab. So this is when the professions really started taking off. And at that time, occupational therapy owned a lot of the mental health aspect. Okay. The body was also divided in half between the upper and lower body between the two professions. But more importantly, and for the sake of why I chose OT, was this mental health aspect of things. The fact that we are caring about your roles, habits, and your routines, the things that are meaningful to you that you want to get back to, which, by the way, is what occupational therapy is. It's about getting back to the things that matter to you. So it's
Mm.
not my goals for you. And it's not even me simply saying, I'm going to have you do 3 sets of 10 of clamshells. It's looking at your life and saying, how do we make sense of this now? Maybe you've just had a baby, which is what my private practice specialized in, the functional pelvis in New York City. You just had a baby, you're leaking urine now, maybe intimacy is painful. How can we get, what are things that matter to you? What do you want to get back to doing? And you'll tell me, and we'll make goals around that that often involve your everyday life. So if you have time for exercise, great. A lot of my clients who just had children did not. So we fit it into their life. How are they unstacking the dishwasher? How are they picking up their baby? How are they changing baby? How are they taking baby out of the crib? How are they getting into the car? These things matter. This makes up the bulk of our life. It's not the 1 hour increment, Nicole, that you and I might be lucky to fit in a couple sets of exercises. It's how we're living our life. It's how you and I are sitting here having this conversation in our chair. What's our posture like? How are we breathing? And I find that really liberating because if we can focus on the things we're already doing and do them with intention and a consciousness, a conscientiousness, what a beautiful way to be more present and to actually work on some of those goals that you might have when you come to see me, like leaking urine or urinary urgency.
Yeah, this reminds me so much of the fact that I learned from you that no one breathes correctly. And for everyone who's listening, I saw Lindsey a number of years ago, and you were the first person to say to me that none of us really breathe correctly. And I was just so shocked by that. And I remember thinking, um, if I don't know this and I'm in this women's health world, does anybody know this? And it took me quite a while, I remember, to learn how to breathe properly. And I found myself sort of constantly falling back into the incorrect way of doing it because I was thinking about what you're saying with, like you said, loading the dishwasher. How do you pick up your kids? How do you pick up anything? The laundry basket? How do you get out of the car? How do you get out of bed? And all of this stuff is who teaches us this? There's nobody who teaches us this. We sort of just learn, I assume, from the people around us, the adults around us. And I mean, these are such basic life movements every single day. I mean, we do them so unconsciously at this point. We breathe so unconsciously. And yet none of us are really doing them properly. So like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I know you said, obviously, like, this is how you work with people and get them back into balance. Do you have thoughts on the whole breathing thing and just all these functional movements that none of us really do the right way?
Yeah. So I think, the breath thing, I love that example. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And when you and I were working together, I explained it a lot around the fact that the breath is part of the pelvic floor. So it's part of our core canister. So it's better to train something in the group that it's in and not in isolation, right? So if we're breathing 20,000 times a day, let's start there, right? Internal exams can be invasive. They can sometimes be counterproductive. So while they are helpful, they're not our only tool. And in fact, the longer I'm in this field, the more I'm emphasizing the other tools that we have. And we'll hopefully get into that a little bit. So, the breath is part of our inner core system and it nourishes our pelvic floor, right? So anyone watching the video, I've kind of got my hands up into two parentheses. The top parentheses is the respiratory diaphragm. So our breathing muscle, kind of like right around where our bra line sits. And then the bottom hand is the pelvic floor. So when we inhale, the system moves together almost like a French press, and then it comes back up with the exhale. And when the bottom part, the pelvic floor, is kind of stuck or tight or rigid or uncoordinated, it doesn't move so well, even when the breath does. And so that ends up even having a ripple effect, like us breathing more with our accessory muscles, like our neck and our upper shoulders. So that means our pelvic floor isn't getting the nourishment that it often needs and craves, even from a lymphatic system standpoint, to be nourished and to move well. It's rich with blood, it's rich with nerves. And then as I've been studying more and more, Nicole, it's actually also about the nervous system. So when we're breathing in this fight or flight pattern, we're taking short, superficial breaths. Not only does the pelvic floor not get that nourishment that it needs, but we're also in a more frenzied state, a state of reactivity, a state of, you and I both lived in New York City when that siren goes by, woo, just feeling the repercussions of it kind of going through your body and feeling very uptight and maybe not even knowing it. So the side effect of breathing consciously is that you also have a nervous system reset. And because the pelvic floor isn't a part of our body that is all about safety and, feeling secure in the world and in our own role in the world, it has this beautiful side effect that maybe I'm helping your pelvic floor just by talking about breathing because you're feeling safer. And I can't tell you how many times just working with that system we have so much less work to do with the pelvic floor in its specific musculature, because now it's let go, it's available to receive that beautiful lymphatic blood and all of that movement, that gentle massage that the respiratory diaphragm can do when we allow ourselves to use the diaphragm. So it has this incredible ripple effect. We function better, we feel better outside of inside of all the roles that we have, our role as a partner, our role as an employee, our role as a parent, our role as a friend, even just being with yourself. You feel better in the world when you feel safe and when your nervous system is in a less reactive state. So I love starting there because it has this ripple effect that I may not even have to look at your pelvic floor as a pelvic floor therapist, which is kind of incredible.
I know. Y'all best believe that I'm like breathing properly right now. Lindsay is saying this. I know, I'm just laughing to myself because I'm like, okay, I better get on this. I know, because I sometimes I still fall back into it. And I'm just breathing shallowly and I'm not taking into consideration the canister, as you call it. Yeah. And so this brings up, this reminds me, actually, I wanted to talk about this because I had an appendectomy last year, and it was kind of an emergency situation. And people who are listening probably know about this because I talked about it a few times, but all of my PT friends, of course, were like, you are going to need physical therapy and you should get it soon after, or you should start it soon after surgery. And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. And I kind of ignored their advice, which I should know better. Pretty dumb, but I did. And I remember probably within about 2 months, I started having lower back pain, and it got progressively worse. It just would not go away, and then just started to get progressively worse. And I remember, thinking, okay, I probably should have listened to my friends who are a lot smarter than me. But I ended up in PT and working with a chiropractor, and there's been lots of improvement. So things are on the right track now. But it was just insane to me that in our culture, we still are not taking into consideration the work that you do, because I went back to the doctor, or their assistant. I guess it was a PA that I talked to for a post-op probably about 3 weeks later. And she fired off a million questions, and then she was like, okay, you're good to go. And I was like, well, wait, I have like 5,000 questions for you. And so I asked questions, but it was amazing because her whole perspective was, you're great and everything's healed up wonderfully, and I'm sending you on your way. And so then in my conversations with our mutual friend, Jessica Drummond, she said to me, honestly, you're looking at like 6 to 9 months really of recovery in many cases. Like that's what I would think for your situation, considering what you've described to me. And I just thought, wow, 6 to 9 months, because these are like tiny little incisions, this is all laparoscopic. I was not even in the hospital for 24 hours. So I would love to hear your take on this, because I feel like in our society, we do not at all, like once a surgeon, and I get it, once a surgeon's done with you and you're good to go, from their perspective, you're good to go. But we're not really looking at the structural components at all, it seems like.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story with us, Nicole. It really makes me think about pre or postnatal people, and how when they
Yes.
go to their 4 week, 5 week, 6 week checkup, they're told, go back to sex. Like go back to exercise, whatever you lift or CrossFit. Yeah, just go right back to it. Right. It's this very nonchalant, I think they think they're empowering us, right? Like, you're
Yeah.
so resilient. You've got this. This is me being optimistic. Some it's just lack of education. Actually, probably, let's be honest, it's probably 100% lack of education. But I think they feel excited to say, you've got this. You just had a baby. It's so natural. Go back to those activities of choice. And the reality is, we are resilient, and you are resilient, Nicole. What you went through, like, you do have this. But why don't we do this optimally? Why don't we take our time and recognize that, okay, I'm your PA. This is out of my zone of genius. I don't really know what the next steps in rehab would be, but I've connected with some incredible therapists that do. We've got a reference list for you when you check out today. Check them out, because that appendectomy, like it's connected to the back of your body, that transversus abdominis, those lower abdomen goes right to the back of your body, even your pelvic floor. Oh my gosh, even your tongue, it goes up to your tongue. So why don't you go ahead and consider that? I can't answer any questions, it's not my area, but a lot of my clients have really gained a lot from this. I guess that's a lot of giving up of hubris to being able to say that's not your area of expertise. But at the same time, it kind of lets the person know this is where I stop. I've
Right.
done my job. I've helped you have this baby. I've done your surgery. Let's go ahead and just know there's a continuity of care that you could really benefit from. So it really does frustrate me because we look to these people in their positions of authority for guidance. And when they're negligent, and I think it is negligence, that
Mhm.
they're not letting us know there are optional next steps that you could say no to. But when they don't even present it like it's an option, I've trusted you. I did well with this procedure with you. I had my baby. I had my appendectomy. Why wouldn't I think that you wouldn't have my best interest at heart and tell me there was another option if I could? Right. So it's pretty infuriating. Even women that have C-sections, it's a major abdominal surgery that's not laparoscopic. It's like, let's do best by these people. My dad actually just got his other knee replaced recently. And yeah, he went through, scar massage and the whole protocol that I think we should all be considering, especially when it comes to parts of the body that have such an effect on our deep strength and inner core. And that's exactly the part of the body that we're talking about.
Oh, totally. I know. Even at PT that I'm doing right now, there hasn't been a lot of conversation about the scar tissue and the adhesions and
Mm.
how that impacts everything basically. So again, it's like you said, it's just this lack of cohesiveness, I suppose you could say, and an understanding of all the different modalities that could be utilized to help that person fully recover versus just recovering 70%. And I get that
Yeah.
sense from a lot of people. I'm sure you do too in your work that people are just recovering barely. They're never really fully recovering from big surgeries like C-sections. I talk to women all the time and they all have some form of chronic pain or chronic issue that they didn't have before a C-section.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. And so I think, many times we have to be our own best self advocate, and knowledge is power. It's one of the reasons why I love your podcast. I've learned so much. And the more we can share
Same.
our experiences with each other, the better we all are, because choice is what we need. So you made a choice. Perfect. But you had a choice to make. And that's
Yeah.
it. It's the idea that we know that these options are available to us. The way I define health is really having options. And I define healthy movement the same way. So if I always reach for my glass of water on the desk that I'm sitting at the same way, and I don't remember that I can actually use my other arm, I can actually, turn to the side a little bit, maybe get my neck involved. Habits are so powerful. It's one of the things that as an occupational therapist, I love thinking about. And so when we change those up and we have options and variety of movement patterns and even variety of thoughts and perspectives, I think we're all so enriched. And as we get older, I think that that's even more important and powerful to know that there are options out there. So whether that's an option to choose therapy after a procedure, an option in the way grab a glass off the top, counter in your kitchen, options are beautiful because
Mm.
it's that variety that keeps us fresh and resilient.
It certainly does. I know that options is a good point because I feel like a lot of us don't because we don't have the knowledge about these options. And then these options are not available. And so I hear this often from women, and they say something along the lines of, well, I pee when I jump on a trampoline and I pee when I jump rope or I exercise. And I never used to before, but I don't really even know what to do. I've just kind of been told this is it. Like it's normal, or it's just a thing that happens after you have a baby or as you go into perimenopause or whatever. And I feel like that, brings up a lot of what you've been getting into, which is more of that, trauma informed care, particularly for pelvic health, because there are so many things that happen to us throughout our lives. And I mean, I've had countless conversations with clients over the years about going to a gynecologist, and it was not at all care that felt like they really had their back, or they were looking out for them. It was a very challenging experience. And so as it relates to pelvic health and pelvic care. Can you talk about your own experience with becoming a trauma informed practitioner? Because I think that this is something that really is growing in popularity, thankfully. And so there's a lot more awareness around how to approach patients and clients now who have experienced trauma as it relates to their pelvic floor, their reproductive organs.
So, pelvic health is a pretty emerging area of practice, whether you're a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. And we're still figuring out how to do best by our clients. And the reason I bring this up is because I just want to say there's not a trauma informed certification out there for physical therapists or occupational therapists yet. I think this is a great disservice to us as pelvic floor therapists because I think we need to treat every single client we have with a trauma informed lens when we're dealing with a part of the body that is so taboo, that is so full of shame for many of us. It's such a private conversation. We really need to approach it. And to me, it's pelvic health 101. It's the first class we need to take. And yet it doesn't exist. So I feel so passionate about this through my own experiences of working, with thousands of clients throughout the years. This is where we need to start. And my mind goes into two different directions when I talk about this. Number one, you can think about it from trauma to the pelvic floor specifically, right? We can talk about the statistics. 1 in 3 people experience, some sort of sexual assault. There's that, of course. There is also just the fact that so many of us grew up in families or in households where we didn't even use correct anatomical terms for this part of our body. And, all of these things accumulate. How about when we went to a gynecologist and we had a pap smear and we weren't asked first if we were ready? All of these things are stories that collect in our body and in our psyche that do, in fact, accumulate into some sort of a traumatic experience with this part of the body. So now here I come and I'm coming to help you heal and grow and meet your goals. And if I'm not helping you grow in that way and feel empowered in that way, I'm doing a major disservice to you. Now, there is another way we can think about this, and this is through that nervous system perspective that I'm obsessed with when it comes to the pelvic floor. And that is, we all experience little t or big T trauma throughout our lives.
You
right?
took the words right out my mouth, by the way. I was about to say that. I'm so glad you brought this up. Talk
So
about
good.
these. This
Well,
is so good.
please jump in anytime because I want to hear what you have to say about this
No,
too.
you've got all the goods.
It's a great conversation. So, little T trauma is just things that happen throughout our life, throughout our day that maybe you wouldn't think to mention to a friend, but it does accumulate into some part of you that feels, let's say, on edge or at ill ease. And then you've got the big T traumas. So a car accident, going through a medical emergency, an unexpected C-section. These are all big T traumas. Well, it doesn't matter if they're little t or big T. They accumulate to feeling, especially, we're talking here in 2023, we've all had COVID these last couple of years to contend with. And this sense of, being unsure, are we safe? Where's our place in this world? Leads us to not really feeling safe in our own bodies. And when we exist in this world and you really find things, maybe you're quickly reactive to things, or maybe you find like you're disassociating or shutting down. I mean, there's so many ways we could experience this. And we have a myriad of survival responses that we experience throughout our life. But it's often an indication that, that trauma is accumulating and we haven't let it go. So I think a lot about like wild animals, how after they have a near death experience or a fight with another animal, what do you see them do? Right? They shake it off.
They shake it
Right?
off. Yeah.
It's their way of dealing and throwing away that experience, learning from it what they can and leaving it where it was. And our human culture, our modern human culture doesn't do that, Nicole. It stays with us and it just accumulates to when we get to a place where we just are not feeling at ease. And again, it shows differently up in every human being. And so I think if we, again, treat everyone through this trauma-informed lens, especially in pelvic floor therapy, right? We're addressing the nervous system, we're addressing this whole person, and it accumulates or it, gets us to this place where the client, usually their pelvic floor symptoms are in a whole different place just when we give them a couple nervous system tools and we treat them with respect. Super quick example about what I mean by this as a practitioner. So many people think pelvic floor therapy, the gold standard is an internal exam, right? So you come to see me, there's not gonna be a speculum, but you're going to have an internal exam. And, usually it involves, looking, putting on a gloved finger, and me assessing your muscles, kind of like I would on your shoulder or your neck if you were coming to me for that. What's another way we can do that? What would a trauma-informed way look of this? Well, number one, 100% getting consent along every step of the way. Truly informed consent. Not, is it okay if we do a pelvic floor exam now? Let's tell them what the exam is. So they actually know what they're saying yes to, right? That's the first step. Second quick example of this would be if they think the gold standard is that classic internal exam where they're on their back, their legs are spread, you've got a gloved finger there, they're going to think, especially in New York, where most of my clients were, or Paris, where I recently moved from, these are type A ambitious people. They're going to want that gold standard. Oh no, that's the way you're supposed to do it. I'm going to say yes. Even if some intuitive sense is saying, this doesn't feel good to me right now. I don't want to grin and bear this. I'm not ready for this. So instead, what if we present options to them, like a menu of, what we can do in external and present them all equally. So it's not like a hierarchy. It's okay, we have some options here and I'd love to hear which one sounds best to you. So number one, we can do an exam fully clothed where you're sitting on a physio ball or some sort of proprioceptive feedback and we're breathing together. We've already talked about the breathing system. So when you inhale, you should feel a little bit of relaxation down there. Maybe your sits bones are spreading. Your belly is growing in its girth, right? Exhale, the opposite. So we'll check for that. That's one way. Second way is we can do it where you are disrobed from the waist down, but we're just looking externally, right? So I'm not touching you there, but I'm watching. Does your clitoris nod when you do a Kegel? Does that pelvic floor sort of relax and soften down and out when you exhale? And then third would be where I do take a gloved hand and I am doing an internal exam. What questions do you have about these options and which one resonates with you today?
Wow.
Right. So this is an example of trauma-informed care. And I just can't imagine pelvic floor therapy not existing this way. So I'm very passionate about this. We could have an entire podcast on this. And so that is why I'm developing a certification for this because I think it needs to be the gold standard of care.
100%. This is so good. I feel like there's so much more to this. So are you saying that there is no standardized training around trauma-informed care or, doing what you just described for anyone in the pelvic health world? Is that what you're essentially saying?
Yes. And I'm going to take that one step further and potentially blow your mind and maybe your listeners even more. There is not even a gold standard for pelvic floor therapy training. Okay. So we are not required. We have to demonstrate that we've received training and that it's within our scope of practice. That could look like a bunch of things. That could look like an online course where you've never actually touched a body. That could look like you've gone through 20 classes, but there is no standard protocol. I am simultaneously excited by this and also very disenchanted by this. I'm excited by this because pelvic floor therapy can take on what you as a practitioner are really excited by. So let's say you really like energetic work. You're really into, connecting to the part of your body that, is spiritual. You can absolutely do that. You love hands-on work. You love that biomechanical approach where you're going in there and doing visceral work and really, correcting mechanics of the body and joint mobilizations. You can do that. There's a variety of ways to be a pelvic floor therapist. This is beautiful because we're all drawn to different things. This is also tricky because let's say you, Nicole, are really drawn to that biomechanical approach. You really want hands-on work. And in fact, if you came to see me and I didn't put my hands on you, you'd be like, what did I just do? Why did I pay this money for this experience? Whereas maybe, your colleague sitting next to you really wants more some respectful listening where you're telling me about your birth story, telling me about your appendectomy, telling me about your father who had prostate and bladder cancer. And it started there. And we spend time with that therapeutic use of self, really connecting and developing a rapport. Perhaps we talk a little bit about posture and breathing. I talk about the optimal number of times you're supposed to pee a day. And I say, I'll see you next week. So the other person would be probably pretty unhappy with that second experience, right? So if we can accurately let people know about the experience that we're offering, either through an initial screening call, our website, our paperwork, you're going to have options to choose. I actually don't want to talk during my 60-minute session. Perhaps I want to be face down. I'm hoping you're going to help me connect to my glutes and I don't want to talk. Versus another therapist who is going to provide a lot of education, which is the type of therapist I am, and really help you empower and see the role that your habits and routines play on some of the experiences that you're having. So it can lead to a disenchantment with the process when maybe you went to a pelvic floor therapist once, you were expecting one thing and you got the other. So this
Yes.
is where the gold standard and not having a set curriculum can be tricky.
Which I definitely feel like I've heard that from multiple women I've talked to, where they've said something along the lines of, I've been to a pelvic physical therapist and I just haven't, it wasn't quite what I was expecting, or I just didn't feel like I got the results that I was hoping for. So yes, I can see that there's the incongruence there a little bit. Is this the same for OBGYNs? Do
Mm.
they get this kind of training at all? Do
So
they?
the only profession that really gets training in the pelvic floor is a urogynecologist. So a urologist doesn't, a gynecologist doesn't. They know the cervix, they know, the vulva, but they don't know about the 14 muscles that are between the cervix and the vulva, but a urogynecologist does.
Right. Okay. And in terms of this trauma informed care training, is that something they get?
I don't think it's a
I don't think
standard
so.
for them either.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see a shift in that. I
Yeah.
really do. It was really interesting. I just had a pediatrician appointment with my children, and we've been living in France the last 3 years, and it's a different healthcare system over there. But I have an 8 and 10-year-old, and we were in the appointment with them, and they asked permission to look at, they lifted up my child's pants, both my children's pants. They asked permission for us. They asked permission to the child, and then they told the child, by the way, only a doctor or your parents can do this. This is yours. And went on to talk. And I was like, this is different. This isn't something that happened in our pediatrician appointment in America. It definitely didn't happen in France. So I think we're going to start to see changes in all of the realms of care. I hope we do, Nicole.
Yeah. That's amazing. Is there anything else that you want to share for someone who maybe is looking for a pelvic physical therapist, or someone who does the work that you do, and they really are looking for someone who has or is trauma informed or just has that kind of training? Is there anything that
Mhm.
someone
Yeah, and
might
I
want to look
would
for?
say it's always a good idea to call and interview your practitioner.
Yeah.
You have options, you have choices. And even if it's not within your own community, virtual work has gotten so good, especially even before COVID, it was there because pelvic floor therapy is often not available in many of the communities. It's in the bigger cities, but not in all the cities. And so we are adept at telehealth, but I think it's gotten even more prevalent. So don't be confined if there's not someone in your own city that you really jive with. There are more practitioners out there. Call an interview. And this is the case with everyone. I think your dentist, your gynecologist, call and ask some questions. And to me, it's a red flag if they can't talk to you. I usually go, okay, I'm gonna move on and see if the next person will. Definitely a pelvic floor therapist should make the time to talk with you. And I would say ask them if they have experience with the condition you're experiencing. So let's say you're having painful intimacy. Ask, do you have experience treating this? About how many clients have you seen that experience this? Something else I would ask is, will you be prescribing me Kegels? This is a
Mhm.
little bit of a trick question. I kind of want to see how they respond to that. They Kegels is, and we talked about this at our last podcast together, Nicole. So I'm not going to go into depth with it now, but Kegels have the best PR firm that the pelvic floor has ever had, and it's
They
such an
really do.
antiquated advice. And practically, I would say, I'm not giving Kegels to my clients. Most clients, you need to relax and kind of feel safe in their body before they can work on strengthening. So it kind of not trick them, but say, so will you be giving me Kegels? And if they immediately say yes, or if they're like, it depends, and here's why, that's great. Like kind of flesh out their logic a little bit and maybe even their training, because physical and occupational therapists who haven't kept up with research will immediately go to Kegels. People who are keeping up and keeping fresh in their knowledge know not to do that. And then the third thing I would say is, are you trauma informed? What do they say to that? They
Mm.
say, well, what do you mean? Or if they're like, oh my gosh, I've actually taken a couple courses on this, maybe they'll mention my certification by that point. But it's kind of like putting someone in a situation where you're going to see how they respond, right? And if they dismiss you right away, and that's something that you're quite sensitive about, that kind of tells you everything you need to know. So I would say ask about their experience with what you're experiencing. Ask them if they prescribe Kegels, and ask them if they're trauma informed. And maybe a fourth question, if you're feeling, like you have some time, is, well, what does that look like in your practice? When you say yes, you're trauma informed, give me a quick example. And maybe they'll talk you through what I just did about the ways that you can offer informed consent, or the menu of options for the internal exam. Let's see what they say.
So good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that so succinctly and so comprehensively. I feel like that for me just was such a perfect example. As you were talking about it, I was thinking, oh, this is exactly what I've wanted in so many instances with different doctors, and obviously never gotten. Things are just sort of done. And and obviously we've had these conversations with so many clients and patients over the years, right? Where if there was, a C-section situation or an episiotomy or, whatever, or like a vaginal exam that you didn't consent to, or it just goes on. And like you said, it just builds up in the tissues.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then we have all the issues, and and it really is so problematic. So I'm just thrilled that you are moving in this direction and creating a certification program for this. And I would love for you to just share with my audience where they can find you, because I know that you have multiple offerings for various groups of people.
Yeah. So I have something called Kegels That Work, and that's just kegelsthatwork.com. And that's for the public. So, if you're a non-professional and not an OT or a PT, that's a really affordable way where I teach you actually how to do an internal or an external exam to see if Kegels are right for you. Very often they're not, but again, something we don't talk about very often. And then otherwise, I would say for professionals, which is again where I'm really focusing most of my time right now, my website, which is www.functionalpelvis.com. See a lot of my offerings there. I also have a really engaged, supportive Facebook group of almost 5,000 occupational therapists right now, which is called OTs for Pelvic Health. I go live weekly on there, and I have for over 2 years now with something called OT Empower Hour, where I'm just giving free education, because again, we need to talk about this stuff more and more and more. I go into case studies, I go into business topics, I go into diagnoses dives, and now I have a podcast, which I've had the pleasure of having you on, Nicole, and that's called OTs in Pelvic Health. And I have both the public and professionals that listen to it, so you can check that out as well.
Amazing. Lindsey, thank you so much for being such an amazing friend to me, and just an incredible support to so many people who are dealing with these issues and don't know where to go. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing all of this today.
Oh, a complete pleasure, Nicole. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. That's a wrap. Be sure to click that subscribe button to join me for more Girl Talk Gone Menstrual in upcoming episodes. But in the meantime, check out my latest Period Party episode. And if you're looking for a deeper dive into your hormones, go ahead and take my period quiz at nicolejardim.com/quiz.